Before we dive into one of the most fascinating coin stories you will ever hear, if you have not subscribed to this channel yet, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell, because every single week we bring you the kind of content that could literally change how you look at the coins sitting in your drawer, your attic, or the old tin box your father left behind. You do not want to miss a single episode. Now let us get into it. Somewhere in the world right now there is a man, maybe a man just like you, sitting at a kitchen table going through an old collection. He is not expecting much. Few old pennies, maybe some worn coins from another era. And then he picks up one small, round coin and he feels something different in his hand. He turns it over. He squints at the date. And in that moment, without knowing it yet, he is holding something that connects him directly to the British Empire, to the Royal Mint, to over a century of history, and to a value that would make most people sit down very slowly and take a long, deep breath. That coin is the 1960 United Kingdom 2 shillings, also known as the florin. And today we are going to talk about exactly what makes this coin so extraordinary. Now, most people hear the words 2 shillings and they think that is practically nothing. That is pocket change from a grandmother's purse. And that is precisely what makes this story so powerful. Because what looks ordinary on the surface is almost never ordinary when you start to understand the history behind it. The men who built great fortunes in this world were never the ones who dismissed things too quickly. They were the ones who looked closer. They were the ones who asked the right questions. And the right question here is not what did this coin buy in 1960. The right question is what does this coin represent, and what is it worth to the right person today? Let us start at the beginning, and I mean the real beginning, because the story of this coin does not start in 1960. It starts more than 100 years before that. In 1849, the British government made a bold and controversial move. They introduced a new coin called the florin, worth 2 shillings, or 1/10 of a pound. This was not just any coin. This was Britain's first serious attempt at creating a decimal currency system, at a time when the rest of the world was still debating whether such a thing was even possible. The florin was ahead of its time. It was designed to simplify commerce, to modernize finance, to bring the mighty British Empire into a new age of calculation and trade. But the first version of this coin caused a scandal. The original 1849 florin was struck without the Latin phrase that had always appeared on British coinage, the phrase meaning, "by the grace of God." The public was outraged. Religious groups protested. The press condemned it. And that very first florin earned itself an infamous nickname that has followed it through history ever since: the godless florin. The design had to be recalled and redesigned. And from that moment forward, every single florin ever minted carried with it a legacy of debate, of identity, and of national pride that you can feel even today when you hold one in your hand. By the time we reached 1960, the florin had survived over a century of British history. It had passed through the reigns of Queen Victoria, King Edward VII, King George V, King George VI, and now sat firmly in the era of Queen Elizabeth II. Think about what those years contained. 2 world wars, the rise and fall of empires, the Great Depression, the rebuilding of an entire civilization. And through every single one of those events, this coin was in people's hands. It was in soldiers' pockets. It was on shop counters in London, in Edinburgh, in Cardiff and Belfast. It was real, physical, everyday money during some of the most defining moments in modern human history. The 1960 florin specifically belongs to the Elizabeth II era of this coin. And that era carries its own very special weight. When Queen Elizabeth II came to the throne in 1952, the Royal Mint had to completely redesign the florin. They needed a new portrait, a new legend, a new face to represent a new reign. And what they produced was something that collectors today consider among the most elegant coin designs that Britain ever created. On the front, the obverse, you see the young laureate portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, sculpted by the artist Mary Gillick. It is a portrait full of dignity and grace. The Queen faces to the right, wearing a laurel wreath, and surrounding her portrait are the Latin words that translate to Elizabeth II, "By the grace of God, Queen." Those words, after the scandal of the godless florin over 100 years earlier, carried enormous meaning. They were a statement. They were a declaration. They were a reminder that this coin, this small piece of metal, represented something far larger than its face value. Now turn the coin over to the reverse, and this is where it truly becomes beautiful. At the very center of the coin sits a crowned Tudor rose. The Tudor rose is one of the most powerful symbols in all of British history. It was the emblem that united the houses of York and Lancaster after the Wars of the Roses, one of the bloodiest conflicts England ever saw. It was the flower that became the symbol of the English crown itself, worn by Henry VIII, carried forward by Elizabeth I, and now, centuries later, placed at the very heart of this coin. Surrounding that central rose, you will find the thistle of Scotland, the shamrock of Northern Ireland, and the leek of Wales. All four nations of the United Kingdom, united on one coin, in one design, in one moment of history. This was not accidental. Every element of this design was deliberate. The men and women at the Royal Mint who created this understood exactly what they were doing. They were placing the entire identity of a nation onto a piece of copper and nickel no bigger than the palm of your hand. And speaking of what this coin is made of, this is something that many people find surprising, and it matters greatly to the story. The 1960 florin was struck in copper-nickel, a combination of copper and nickel. Now, earlier florins, those produced before 1947, were made of genuine silver, real solid silver. But after the Second World War, Britain was economically exhausted. The cost of silver had risen dramatically, and the government made the difficult decision to move away from precious metal coinage. From 1947 onwards, the florin was made in copper-nickel, so the 1960 coin in your hand is not silver. But here is what you must understand, and this is the part that separates the casual observer from the serious collector. The value of a coin is almost never about its metal content alone. The value of a coin is about its history, its condition, its rarity, its story, and the passion of the people who want to own it. And on all of those measures, the 1960 florin has a story that is richer and deeper than most people ever realize. The specifications of this coin are precise and consistent with the care that the Royal Mint has always brought to British coinage. The 1960 florin weighs 11.31 grams. Its diameter is 28.5 millimeters. Its thickness is 2.5 millimeters. It has a milled edge, meaning the edges are ridged, a feature that was originally introduced centuries ago to prevent people from shaving off small amounts of precious metal from the rim of coins, a practice that was once surprisingly common. Even in 1960, when the coin no longer contained silver, that milled edge remained, a quiet nod to centuries of tradition that the British have always been extraordinarily good at preserving. Now let us talk about the year 1960 itself, because context is everything when it comes to understanding a coin's significance. The world in 1960 was a place in dramatic transformation. The Cold War was at its most tense. The space race between the United States and the Soviet Union was accelerating. Across Africa and Asia, nations that had once been part of the British Empire were gaining their independence one by one. In Britain itself, the 1960s were the beginning of one of the most culturally explosive decades the modern world had ever seen. The Beatles had not yet released their first record. The swinging 60s had not yet begun. Britain stood at the exact hinge point between its imperial past and its modern future. And in that precise moment, this coin was being struck by the Royal Mint and placed into circulation across the entire country. Every single person in Britain in 1960 handled this coin. Working men carried it in their trouser pockets. Shopkeepers dropped it into cash registers. Children received it as pocket money and spent it on sweets. It passed through the hands of factory workers and bank managers, fishermen and farmers, soldiers and students. This coin was not sitting in a vault. It was alive. It was moving through the veins of an entire nation at one of the most pivotal moments in that nation's modern history. And the coins that survived that journey, the ones that were set aside, saved, kept in good condition, those are the ones that collectors today seek with a passion that might genuinely surprise you. Here is part 3 of your script. Words 1401 to 2100. Say continue for part 4. Let us talk about collectors for a moment, because understanding who wants this coin and why they want it is absolutely essential to understanding its value. The world of serious coin collecting, what the experts call numismatics, is not a hobby for people who are simply bored on a Sunday afternoon. It is a pursuit that combines history, art, economics, and genuine passion in a way that very few other hobbies can match. And the men who collect British pre-decimal coinage, particularly coins from the Elizabeth II era, are some of the most dedicated and knowledgeable collectors in the entire world. These are men who have spent decades studying every detail of every coin. They know the difference between a coin struck early in a production run and one struck late. They know which years had higher mintage figures and which years were comparatively scarce. They know what mint luster looks like under proper lighting, and they know immediately when a coin has been cleaned, polished, or tampered with in any way. And what these collectors understand, what they have understood for a long time, is that the pre-decimal British coinage series represents one of the great artistic and historical achievements in the entire history of money. These coins were not mass-produced tokens. They were crafted artifacts. They were the physical expression of a nation's identity, its monarchy, its heraldry, its language, its values. When you hold a 1960 florin in your hand, you are holding something that was designed by artists, approved by the palace, struck by craftsmen at the Royal Mint, and circulated across an entire kingdom. That is not nothing. That is a remarkable thing. And the collectors who understand that are willing to pay remarkable prices to own the finest examples. Now, condition is the single most powerful factor in determining what any coin is worth. This is true for every coin in the world, but it is especially true for 20th century British coinage, where millions of coins were struck and the difference between a worn, circulated example and a pristine, uncirculated specimen can be the difference between a coin worth almost nothing and a coin worth a sum that would astonish most people. Coin grading is a precise science, and serious collectors and dealers use specific terminology to describe a coin's condition. At the lowest end, you have coins that are heavily worn, where the design details have been almost completely smoothed away by years of circulation. Moving up, you have coins in fine condition, where the major design elements are clear but there is obvious wear on the high points. Above that, very fine, where most details are sharp but some light wear is visible. Then extremely fine, where the coin looks nearly new with only the slightest traces of wear. And at the very top, uncirculated or mint state, where the coin appears exactly as it did the moment it left the Royal Mint, with full original luster and absolutely no trace of circulation whatsoever. For the 1960 florin, a heavily worn example, the kind you might find in a jar of old coins, might be worth only £1 or £2 in today's market. A coin in fine to very fine condition will fetch more. But a 1960 florin in truly exceptional, uncirculated condition, with full mint luster, sharp details on the young Queen's portrait, crisp definition on every petal of the Tudor rose, every thistle spike, every shamrock leaf perfectly struck, that is a coin that enters a completely different conversation entirely. That is a coin that serious collectors will pursue. That is a coin that auction houses take seriously. And that is a coin whose value climbs in a way that most ordinary people would find genuinely difficult to believe until they see it for themselves. But condition alone does not tell the whole story of this coin's value and appeal. There is another dimension to this that most casual observers completely overlook, and it has to do with the coin's place in history as a transitional object, as a piece of a world that no longer exists. You see, the 1960 florin was produced with only 11 years left before Britain would make one of the most dramatic changes to its everyday life in centuries. In 1971, the United Kingdom switched to decimal currency. Overnight, the old system of pounds, shillings, and pence, a system that had been in place in various forms for over 1,000 years, was replaced by the modern decimal system that Britain still uses today. The florin, the 2-shilling piece, survived that change longer than almost any other pre-decimal coin. Because its value, 1/10 of a pound, happened to match the new 10-pence coin exactly, the florin was allowed to continue circulating alongside the new decimal coinage all the way until 1993. It was the very last pre-decimal coin to be demonetized. The very last survivor of an ancient monetary tradition. Think about what that means. Think about the symbolic weight of that fact. This coin outlived its entire era. It watched every other pre-decimal denomination disappear around it. The farthing gone. The halfpenny gone. The penny, the threepence, the sixpence, the shilling, the half-crown, the crown, all gone. And the florin kept circulating, kept moving through people's hands, kept buying things in British shops, right up until the final years of the 20th century. It was a ghost of the old world, walking through the new one. And now, decades after its demonetization, the finest examples of this coin are being sought by collectors who understand that they are purchasing not just a piece of metal, but a piece of time itself. A piece of a Britain that existed before the internet, before mobile phones, before the world changed in ways that nobody in 1960 could have imagined. There is something else about this coin that deserves careful attention, something that speaks directly to the kind of man who has the wisdom and the patience to look beyond the obvious. The florin story is a story about persistence. This denomination was introduced in 1849 amid controversy and public outrage. It was called godless. It was criticized, mocked, and nearly abandoned. And yet it survived. It survived for 118 years of continuous production. It survived 2 world wars, the death of an empire, the transformation of an entire society. And then, even after it was officially replaced, it survived in circulation for another 22 years. That is a coin with the kind of endurance that commands respect. That is. Now let us talk about something that connects this coin to an even broader and more powerful story, because the 1960 florin did not exist in isolation. It was part of a complete set of pre-decimal British coinage that represented the fullness of Queen Elizabeth II's early reign. And within that set, within that series of coins struck between 1953 and 1967, certain years stand out. Certain dates carry a weight that others do not. The collector who understands which years are scarcer, which years had lower production runs, which years came at moments of particular historical significance, that collector holds a tremendous advantage over the person who simply picks up any old coin and assumes they are all equal. They are not equal. They never have been. And the 1960 florin, examined carefully within the context of its entire series, reveals details that reward the patient and the knowledgeable in ways that the impatient and the uninformed simply never discover. Consider the men who collected these coins in real time, during the 1950s and 1960s, men who set aside crisp, new examples straight from the bank, kept them wrapped in paper or placed carefully in albums, stored them in cool, dry places away from light and moisture and the destructive effects of time. Those men, many of them now gone, made decisions that their children and grandchildren are only now beginning to fully appreciate. Because the coins those men preserved, the ones kept in perfect condition for 60 years or more, those are the coins that are entering the collector market today and commanding prices that would have seemed impossible when the coins were first struck. This is the power of preservation. This is the reward of foresight. And it is a lesson that applies not just to coins but to everything in life that has genuine, lasting value. The Royal Mint itself understood the importance of this era in British coinage. That is why, even after the florin ceased to be produced for general circulation after 1967, the Royal Mint struck one final set of florins in 1970, produced exclusively for collectors, for proof sets, for the historical record. They knew that what they had created during the Elizabeth II era was something worth preserving formally. They knew that future generations would want pristine examples of these coins. And they were absolutely right. Those 1970 proof florins, struck to the highest possible standard with mirror-like fields and frosted design elements, are among the most sought-after pieces in British numismatic history. But even the regular circulation coins from years like 1960, when found in exceptional condition, carry a prestige and a value that continues to grow as the decades pass and the supply of truly fine examples continues to shrink. Because here is something that every serious collector knows and that most casual observers never stop to consider. Every year that passes, the number of high-grade examples of any given coin decreases. Coins get lost. Coins get spent by people who do not realize what they have. Coins get damaged, cleaned improperly, stored badly, melted down. The supply of truly exceptional coins does not grow over time. Contracts. And as it contracts, as the number of available mint-state examples of the 1960 florin slowly but steadily diminishes, the demand from serious collectors around the world does exactly the opposite. Grows. It grows because the population of wealthy, educated, historically aware collectors is larger today than it has ever been. It grows because Britain's cultural legacy, the monarchy, the history, the pageantry, the art, the literature, the music, all of it continues to fascinate people not just in the United Kingdom but across Europe, across Asia, across the Americas, across the entire world. And coins like the 1960 florin are tangible pieces of that legacy. You can hold them. You can feel them. You can pass them to your children and your grandchildren and tell them the story of what they are holding. Think about what it means to own a piece of history that carries this much depth. You are not simply owning a coin. You are owning a physical artifact from the early reign of the longest-serving monarch in British history. You are owning a piece of metal that was touched by the hands of the people who built post-war Britain, who rebuilt their cities, who raised their families, who sent their children to school in a country that was determined to be great again after the devastation of the Second World War. Every one of those people, in their daily lives, in their ordinary moments, handled coins exactly like this one. There is a human warmth to old coinage that no other collectible can quite replicate. Painting hangs on a wall. A book sits on a shelf. But a coin was carried close to the body, kept in a pocket, passed from hand to hand, used in the most intimate and ordinary transactions of daily life. That intimacy is part of what makes old coins so deeply compelling to so many serious collectors. And the design on this particular coin, that central Tudor rose surrounded by the thistle, the shamrock, and the leek, carries a political and emotional significance that goes far beyond mere decoration. In 1960, the question of British national identity was very much alive. Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland all had their own distinct cultures, languages, and histories. The decision to place all four national emblems together on this coin was a deliberate act of unity, a statement that these four nations, whatever their differences, were bound together under one crown and one coinage. Today, in a world where questions of Scottish independence and Irish reunification are very much part of the political conversation, that symbolism on the 1960 florin feels not like history but like a living, breathing document of national identity. Feels urgent, feels relevant, and that relevance only adds to the depth of meaning that serious collectors attach to owning the finest possible example of this coin.